Imagine a world where Christ followers stepped up and answered his call on their lives. Imagine a world where Christ followers put their faith and trust in God unwaveringly and without qualification. Imagine a world where Christ followers lived out God's purpose for them in everything they do. The It's Not My Credit to Take podcast explores the awe and wonder of how God shows up in the lives of strong, principled Christ followers from all walks of life. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be transformed. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, and I'm a faithful husband, loving father, loyal friend, and an unapologetic follower of Jesus Christ. Welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast. Hello, Jeanell. How are you today?
I'm well, Ed. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to see you. I'm really happy to have this conversation. My guest today is Jeanell Greene. Jeanell is a life and relationship coach who's on a mission to save marriages and heal families from generational trauma caused in childhood. She received her calling when she turned 40 and subsequently left her job in corporate sales to pursue her passion of helping people. Jeanell loves talking about mindset, integrity, breaking the rules, forgiveness, fear, love, infidelity, family, the importance of having goals, knowing your core values, and finding your purpose in this lifetime. She is well known for helping couples return from the brink of separation and divorce in less than 30 days. And she loves talking about her own marriage of 17 years and how she and her husband keep the fire hot. Jeanell, welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up where you are in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think heartbreak and suffering often make us who we are. Um, Quick segue. I watched this amazing Netflix show this weekend with Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. Have you seen that?
I haven't.
It's amazing. And it really basically, these are two men who have gone through so much, right? The apartheid and the exile of the Dalai Lama, and just how much joy they have in their life and how they have been called to serve out of their suffering. And I feel like that's really who what has made me who I am. And so I really like to start the conversation starting when I was 9. My I grew up first generation Canadian. I'm Filipino background, come from a very poor lineage, I guess. And my parents, of course, came to Canada to give us a better life. And we had a really, really great family and a great childhood. And then when I was 9, I was in my bedroom in my pajamas. Remember, it was nighttime. And my mom calls us down. And there was something in her voice. And I came into the living room, and there I was, 9 years old. My sister was 6, my brother was 3, and we're standing there. And there's my mom, my dad, and 2 sets of luggage. And my mom looks at us and says, "Kids, your dad's leaving. He doesn't love us anymore." And what you don't know is that my dad had been having an affair. And despite the fact that they had this picture perfect marriage, at least I thought so, there was some stuff going on. And it was my mom's best friend. And so my dad had an affair with my mom's best friend who lived in our basement for many, many years. And they were expecting a baby. And so here's my mom at 30, single mom. And fast forward 3 years, my dad would come back and he would be sick. And he would come to my mom and say, "Please forgive me. I want to come home. I'm dying." And my mom forgave him. And she said, "Yes, come home." 2 conditions. Number 1 is that if you're home, you're home. None of this, back and forth stuff. And number 2, we forgive and we forget. We just let it go and we move on, and we, basically pick up where we left off. And for 13 years, my dad got his transplant. 13 years later, my dad passes away. And you would think that, wow, that was a really great happy ending. You got your family back, you got your dad back, and you got to be with him when he passed. And yes, all that was amazing. And what I realized was that there was so much still unresolved and broken within me. And I didn't realize that until I got into my first marriage and the breakdown. And that was the moment, I think, where I just sort of stopped and paused and I said, what is it about me that has me attract this quality of men into my life? The toxic, the abusive, the liars. There was something. I knew there was something about me. I knew this wasn't coincidence. And that was when I started to do the work. I really started to look within. And what I saw was that that little 9-year-old girl watching her daddy leave. And I was a daddy's girl, so that was extra painful. Watching my dad leave is that I made 3 decisions that day as that 9-year-old. And that those decisions was I must be unlovable. Number 2, I can't trust people. And number 3, everybody I love will leave me. And I just saw how that pattern had been playing out in my life for the last 20 years. But I didn't know it until someone pointed it out to me. And so I got really passionate and interested about, wow, this work. And I've basically spent the last 20 years transforming every area of my life, especially relationships. And now I get to be in this beautiful, sweet, playful, deeply vulnerable marriage with someone who loves me unconditionally. And I never really, my mom was taught me unconditional love, but that's, mother's love is different. To be loved by someone and to be human and to make all the mistakes and, dumb things you do and not feel judged or less than because of that has been so nurturing for me. And so now I decided to start my own business in being that for other people because I realized that the world sorely needs to feel heard, to feel like they're not alone. And I think that's why community is so important, right? Then we don't feel like we're different or that, we're unloved. And I think, as a coach, one of the biggest things I've learned is that our greatest fear, I think more than death is being alone. And even death equals being alone. And so, by the grace of God, I just started to get reconnected to this part of me that I think had been asleep for so long, trying to be who I thought everybody wanted me to be, which was this perfect, successful, kind human being. But I think in the last 20 years, I have had the opportunity to discover, well, what do I want? And yes, I've been on this, I like to call the bullet train of life, but until a few years ago, I never questioned why was I even here? And I think that's the question that we all need to ask ourselves. Why are we here? And lucky for me, I figured out why I'm here. And I don't know what comes out of my mouth half the time, but I definitely feel spiritually led. I warn my clients that I have no filter and that I'll say things that are going to probably challenge them or trigger them. But there is, again, some sort of energy that goes through me that everything that I say lands with my clients because they trust me. And that's, I think, so important to feel that you can trust someone with your heart. And so I find it such a privilege to be with people in their darkest moments, to be with men who have probably never cried and they just let go and they show their heart. And they let down that masculine stoicness that they've been told that they need to be and they're just human. And I love being able to connect with someone at that intimate and authentic level.
What was it for you to reclaim your power of personal responsibility? Because you had said just a few moments ago, in reflecting on your first marriage and other relationships, what is it about me? And that takes a lot of courage to ask
Yeah.
that question, because
Yeah.
it's really easy for most people just to continue playing the blame card, and right after the
Mm.
blame card gets played, the victim card comes out right after that. And then we find people that are willing to listen to us, and that just serves to reinforce the attention that we're getting from playing the blame game. What was that
Yeah.
moment for you where, or series of moments where you were able to say, you know what, this is on me and I need to own this? And how did that come about? And then How did that
Yeah.
ultimately lead to the next step of taking personal responsibility?
I would love to say I was really gracious about it, but I was mad and I was crying. I was in a seminar and they were talking about responsibility and how we in society often define responsibility as the realm of blame and fault and obligation. And what they created was the distinction responsibility as simply the ability to respond. And when you're disempowered, when you have it like the problem is outside of you, you never actually have any power. And so yeah, I definitely reacted negatively. And that's why I tell my clients up front, listen, you're probably going to get triggered by me and that's okay. But I wasn't ready for it because I took the seminar with my ex-husband to quote unquote fix him. I'm like, you need to come to this thing so you can get fixed, so you can be the husband that you need to be. The funny thing is he slept through pretty much the whole thing as a way of, I think, checking out and not participating. But that I was like right at the, at the top of my seat, like listening to every word because I realized how much of my identity was in fear, came from fear. And that no wonder I wasn't being able to really move forward in life because I had so much guilt. I had so much obligation as the first child of an immigrant family. I had been molested as a child, I had been bullied. And so I had used, like many people, had used all this evidence to say, well, I'm broken. And so I have a reason to be mad. I have a reason to not have a great life. And in doing the work, I realized, well, why not? And maybe my life has gone the certain way for a reason. And maybe if I took it another level, what if this was actually the divine plan for me? That I'm supposed to suffer and feel these things so that I can be of service in the future. I remember being a child and thinking to myself, God, why me? Why me? I mean, I think I'm a really great person. So why do people treat me so terribly? And so I think that my level of compassion for people would not have been created had I not felt all those things and felt rejected, felt not enough, felt, I was growing up, I was a very competitive, very intelligent, hardworking kid. I was quite gifted. And I was really tiny. I'm very petite. I've always, in the class picture, I'm always in the end. I'm not even 5 feet tall. So yeah, that created a lot of problems in my life growing up, being little and being so easily picked on, having glasses and braces and being really smart and being seen as a teacher's pet. It definitely put a target on my back. And so I spent a lot of my childhood trying to not be myself, trying to fit in, trying to be small enough so that I would feel included. And it was only until I did the work again in that seminar that I realized, like, wow, I have been asleep to my potential and that I needed to do something different. Otherwise, I would waste this opportunity and the gifts that God had given me in my life.
Is it fair to say that your success as a life and relationship coach is largely due to your ability to relate compassionately with that of your clients? And if that's true in part or in full, do you ascribe to the notion that we can't really be compassionate toward others until we are compassionate with ourselves, or we can't fully love others until we can love ourselves? Do you align with that idea?
100%. A lot of the clients that come to me are struggling with that. They're giving and giving and giving, and they're feeling empty inside and they don't know why. And so we explore this notion of worthiness and people pleasing and what I find is a lot of us are not clear about our own values. We kind of become this chameleon where we pick up or imitate other people's values. But when we don't know our values, we're unable to set boundaries. And I remember thinking that boundaries was something negative. And what I realized is boundaries is really, really powerful. So even setting boundaries in my marriage, it's about knowing what is expected and then communicating that to get agreement from your partner so that you're on the same page. So back to your question, you know, I want to talk about forgiveness for a second. I'm so passionate about forgiveness. So many people say to me, Jeanell, I want to forgive. I want to forgive my brother who I've been upset at for 40 years. I want to, but I can't. And I say to them, well, if you don't know what forgiveness is for yourself, like if there's something that you haven't forgiven yourself for, because that's where it starts. If you don't know what that is for yourself, how can you give it to someone else? And love is the same, self-love is the same way. Unless we know what love feels like within our own body, within our own temple, how are we going to be able to really do that effectively for other people? Especially when that love is conditional, even though we don't realize it is, right? That love is conditional. And so you want to be able to just to notice these things of ways of being and then just reflecting, going, okay, where did I learn this from? Who taught me this? Who taught me this belief that, that when I do something really good, that means I'm a good person. But if I say no, that means I'm a bad person. So I can't say no because I don't want people to think I'm a bad person. Right. So there's all these sort of like old beliefs that we were taught as children. And a lot of it comes from our parents. And it was ways for them to control us. So they wanted us to, develop really great habits. So they would praise us and give us a lot of love and validation. But whenever we strayed out of the lines or colored out of those lines and our parents didn't like that, we would be punished in some sort of way, or love would be withheld, or we would get grounded. And that's great and all as children, but then we grow up as adults and we're still stuck in those same cycles. Yeah.
With regard to forgiveness, how do you go about coaching someone who has a misunderstanding about the concept? Because I've come across people that have struggled to forgive. I know in my life there have been those times where it almost feels like the act of forgiving, when we do that, we're giving away our power. But it's exactly the opposite, as far as I can
Mm-hmm.
tell, that whenever we are willing to forgive ourselves and forgive others, we actually reclaim that power. How do you walk someone through that?
Yeah. I want to talk about change for a second, because we will only change ourselves when we are present to the cost of continuing the way we've been going. You know what I mean? And so the first thing I do is I get them present to has been the cost on their life, on their emotional, mental space, holding on to this thing that happened 30, 40 years ago, you know? So we need to get present to that. So for this, I'm thinking about a specific client. I asked him, I said, well, what have you missed out on not talking to your brother for 40 years? And he says, well, I don't know that part of my family. I've missed out on birthdays. I've missed out on knowing my nieces and my nephews. I missed out on having a relationship with my brother. So once he got clear to that impact, then the question was, well, why do you think you're unable to forgive? And so now the reason or their own definition and beliefs come out as to what they think forgiveness is. And so his response was, well, if I forgive him, then that means I'm letting him off the hook. And then I said, okay, well, hop off the hook for what? And he sat there and he's like, I don't know. But, I think once he realized like just the cost, like, okay, well, right now you have a choice. You can forgive your brother And this is the other thing. People don't realize forgiveness is, you don't have to talk to anyone to forgive. You don't need to permission. You don't need to have a conversation with that person. This is just you got to start with the forgiveness of yourself, forgiving yourself for putting yourself in that emotional prison that was caused by another's actions that he or she probably didn't realize hurt you, but you were impacted. And so it's up to you to resolve that for yourself and between you and your maker or your source or God. So I think that's the thing is really, okay, well, if I let this go, what would be the benefit of letting this go? Oh, well, I could have more peace. I could have more connection. I could have more family. Okay, so what do you choose? Do you want to continue living like this or do you want to make a difference? Oh, I want to make a difference. Okay. So then the work where the coaching comes in is what are all those thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that are getting in the way of you getting what it is that you want? If what you want is more love, forgiveness, family, what's in the way of that? That's the work that we do.
I love that. One of the things I've started recently is an affirmation of when I'm aware of a thought of lack or something negative, I actually say out loud, I reject the thought of lack
Mm,
and I only accept thoughts of love, light, abundant life, and prosperity. And
yeah.
Jeanell, it's game changing. So I wanted just to share that with you. Sticking with the topic of forgiveness, were you able to forgive your dad for what he put your mom and the rest of the family through?
Yeah, you know what? I actually only realized that recently that I have let that go. I've recently decided to add support people into my life, like therapists and counselors, because I've got, I carry a lot of my clients' emotions. And I thought that I didn't need that support. And then I realized I was dumping a lot on my husband. And I'm like, this is not his place to hold that space for me. And so I went thinking that I had to deal with my dad's stuff, right? I still needed to unpack that a little bit more. But as I talk about it, there's nothing there for me. And so, yeah, I think I have forgiven him. But, there are definitely moments that I feel sad and I feel angry. And of course, working with so many clients that have very similar stories of being left by their partner, it can sometimes be really emotional for me and a little triggering, a little bit, just remembering what that was like and being that 9-year old at that window watching your dad leave and wondering who's that in that car and is this a joke, like is this a haha, because my dad was a big joker, so I was just waiting for him to turn around and tell me that it was a big joke and it wasn't. It was really hard.
For your mom, as you described how she handled his request to rejoin the family when he was sick, she handled it with so much grace. And I can't imagine handling it with the type of grace that she handled it with. It just doesn't seem to fit, at least where I am in the arc of my life. What do you think gave her the strength to be able to do that?
My mom is an extraordinary woman. Like, I am clear that who I am is largely because of her influence. It's interesting at Ed, because I was looking at how strong I feel like I need to be for my clients. And my own, therapist said, well, what is it about you that you feel like you always need to be strong and that you always need to save people? And I was like, wow, that's totally my mom. But, to your question, I think she just wanted to be strong for us, for the kids. And it hasn't, my dad's been passed away now for 20 years. So this whole thing happened when I was 9. So doing the math to age myself, this was 38 years ago. And so I think as a child, what I saw and what really happened were very two different things. On the outside, I saw a woman who would not let her husband see her cry, to see her hurt. She was just like, you know what? You don't want to be with us? Fine. Go get your stuff and leave. don't want you, was kind of how she came at it. But I know that she cried a lot. And one of my most profound and one of the strongest memories I have around that time when my dad was gone was being in church. Anywhere we went, if there was a church, we would go in and we would, us kids would just sort of sit there bored and like looking around. And there was my mom on her knees praying for a miracle. And so I think when my dad did come back, that there was no question for her. And I actually recently found out that she said, I did it for you guys. I did it because I wanted my children to have a dad. She's like, I don't know if I would have went back to him if it wasn't for you guys. I was like, oh, really? Because she played the part perfectly. She never showed any resentment or grudge towards my dad around it. And that was part of the agreement. And she stuck to it. She never brought it up. She never blamed him. She never, you know, held it over his head during an argument. It was never this, that dirty card that people pull sometimes. She never did that. And so, when he passed away, my mom recently revealed to me that, she would go to his grave and just yell at him and she was just angry. I'm like, really? I did not know that. She's like, yeah, I was really angry. And she's like, and for the longest time, she goes, I always wondered if you really truly loved me.
Mm.
But, again, I think everything happens for a reason. And had my mom not gone through what she went through with my dad, I don't think she would be the person she is today, the healer she is, the teacher she is, she is my greatest teacher. And the beautiful thing about my mom is she never told us what to do or how to be a good person. She just was such an example of it. There's so many people out there that, do as I say, but not as I do. My mom's the total opposite. And so that was such a beautiful gift to me as a child and has given me the strength to do what I'm doing. And the other beautiful thing about my mom is she, unlike many Asian parents, never forced me to be someone I wasn't. Typically Filipinos are either janitors, fast food, or they're nurses. And so my inevitable future was to become a nurse. And when I said, like, I don't want to do that, I actually want to go into business. And I don't know if I'm going to have kids, mom. Like, she's like, that's okay. God will provide whatever you're meant to do in this world, it'll happen. Like, don't worry about it. And so I have had the opportunity just to be myself, to be authentically me and search for that. And I have a partner who encourages that. And so I really want that for my clients, for them to know who they are, to be connected to the people and to their God or to their, whatever it is that they believe in, and to live this life, this short life that we have in a way that leaves the planet and other people better than when you got here. And so that's what I'm just trying to do. And for me, I'm so passionate about family because no child should have to go through what I went through. And I think that so many parents are just not they don't care, they're bad parents. They just don't have the tools, they don't have the skills, they don't have the mentorship to know what that's like because they didn't have that modeled for themselves. And that's why I have so much compassion for those people.
So good. Just for the sake of saying it out loud, your mom seems like a remarkable woman. So wanted to share that. You had referenced earlier about setting boundaries. And it occurs to me that whenever we enter into marriage, a lot of things go unsaid. And there are a lot of assumptions made that serve as de facto boundaries. And yet when your dad returned, your mom vocalized those boundaries. And I know I've struggled with this in my marriage. Fortunately, my wife and I are on the other side of this frustration where we held certain expectations for one another that we never communicated out loud and then held one another accountable to the expectations we didn't say out loud, which
Isn't that
is
crazy?
it's crazy unfair.
Yeah.
You coach couples that are in the midst of struggle, maybe even approaching separation or divorce.
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to coach them when they were engaged, what would you
Mm.
say to them?
Yeah. To your point, I think many couples don't talk about their values. There's times when I'd like to think that virtually almost every marriage can be saved, but there are ones that I'm kind of like, what are you guys doing together? You know, I think, personality is one thing, but for example, intimacy and specifically intercourse. Some people, that is a extremely important part of being in a partnership. And for some people, it's not at all. And so I wonder, like, how do these people get together when one is, they're on completely different planes when it comes to sexual need? So that's a hard one. That's a hard one to overcome. But 99% of my clients are not that. They are just missing that emotional connection. But yeah, to your point, we need to talk about, first of all, what are our values, what are our expectations, and then more importantly is we need to get agreement from the other person that they are aligned with that. Because if there isn't alignment, that requires a further conversation. And I think, when I look back at my first marriage, I think that was definitely missing. I think the other piece is that we need to, if, going back to the engaged scenario, I think we also, especially women, we need to be really clear about why we want to get married. So many people, including myself, I'm guilty of this too, get married just because we don't want to be lonely. But we almost don't care who the other person is. We just are so afraid of being alone, which points to a lack of love for self. Because as I develop my self love, the more I love being alone. I love it so much because I love who I am. I'm like a fun, I'm a big thinker, I'm adventurous, I'm silly, I'm playful, and I love discovering myself as my own best friend. But definitely, 5, 6, even 10 years ago, I couldn't say that about myself. I didn't even know who I was because I fed off other people's energy. And being Filipino and being the eldest of three, I always had family. I always had my siblings. And then, when I left my parents' house, I was with my first husband. Not long after that, I met Mike. And so this whole discovering who I am and my spirit is actually a very new thing for me. I would say maybe in the last 3 years, I've really got to know myself intimately. And in that, got to know God intimately within myself.
How has that improved your marriage? Because you have been married to Mike for 17 years, and you just said that this awakening of sorts is relatively new. So Mike's been along for the ride with you.
Yeah.
How has this impacted and or benefited your marriage?
The beautiful thing about my husband and I is we're both have secure attachment styles and there's such a level of trust. So I wouldn't say it has really affected our relationship. If anything, it's just sharing more intimately of who I am as I discover myself. And so it's almost like I'm creating myself and manifesting a new version of myself. And so I get to introduce him to a new woman almost every week. And he gets to be my cheerleader and celebrate these big things, especially as it relates to my fears and what holds me back from being the most, I don't want to use powerful, but effective coach that I could possibly be. It's like the more I get to who I am, the more I am able to hold space for my clients to get to who they are. So, for example, one of the new things that I discovered about myself is anger. My whole life, anger wasn't really part of my mom's never angry. When she was disappointed, but she never yelled at you. And it's only been in the last few months, maybe no, I would say the last year, I've started to explore this thing called anger. And at first it was so uncomfortable and I felt like icky about it. But as again, as I start to grow within myself and show compassion to myself, and I'm exploring this thing called anger, I'm really exploring my own humanity. And I could see that whenever my clients showed anger, that made me really a little edgy, a little, a little like ugh, uncomfortable. But now, as I explore my own anger, I can really be with my client's anger and not make it significant and just be like, it's okay. You can be angry. It's all right. And I think it's part of my job is letting people know that it's okay to give themselves permission to feel everything that they feel without looking at themselves as less than, and actually looking at it as beautiful, looking at vulnerability as powerful, looking at crying as courage rather than weakness. And that's something that I've also had to work through, because coming from a strong woman who never cried, who never showed weakness, who never asked for help, who never complained, I could see how that molded me to be like, oh, I need to be that way too. And realizing, you know what? Doesn't work for me. And it's okay. And just discovering how that shows up in my life and how do I use that to my advantage, but also, okay, how do I look at this as a lesson? If I was looking for Jeanell 2.0, the next version of me, which I feel like is maybe every month there's kind of this new evolution of me. Who is that woman, and what does she need to overcome to get to the next level of her journey?
How much of that incremental growth do you attribute to connecting to your higher self, or the part of you that which is God or Holy Spirit, whatever we want to call that? How much of your development or evolution forward can you tie back to that?
I would say 100%, because every single night, my prayer every night is, Lord, help me be the beacon for those that are suffering and who need me the most. And it's funny because most of my clients are people who have been to therapists, who've been to counselors, who have tried everything to make it work. And this is their last attempt. And I'm not going to lie to you, this work is hard. Holding space for the brokenness and the darkness and the fear and the, I don't know if evilness is the word, but the pain, and being able to hold that space without trying to get rid of it. I think that's the other thing is we try as humans try to numb out the negative pain. We're told that negative emotions is bad. And so we're constantly trying to push it away. And then we feel guilt when we feel it, when really it's not about pushing it away. It's really about leaning in and asking yourself, okay, where is this coming from? Because it's useful information. And I think that's part of the reason why our society is so unhappy and feels so broken. It's because we're taught we have to be perfect. We have to have it all together. We can't show anger. We can't show weakness. We can't show fear. And so with my clients, like that's part of what we do is really leaning into, okay, what is actually underneath the anger? It's fear, it's sadness, it's loneliness. And when we can actually talk to each other heart to heart rather than defense mechanism to ego, right? It's a very different conversation. But as children, we didn't grow up hearing love and patience and understanding, most of us, right? We heard yelling and disrespect and domination. And so I'm really committed to teaching people a new way to relate, to connect. Because that's at the end of the day, that's what we want, right? We want to feel connected. We want to feel appreciated. We want to be happy, and we want peace in our families. And it sounds really simple and easy. And yet very few people actually know, A, what that even means and looks like for themselves. And C, more importantly, how to even get there.
It occurs to me as you were talking that we're conditioned to meet hate with hate. We're conditioned to
Hmm.
meet anger with more anger, violence with more violence. And yet, the only thing that heals any of that is love and light, as far as I can tell. Do you agree with that?
100%. And, going back to what I talked about, that Netflix documentary really drove that home for me because these two men, experienced a lot of violence in their lives, and the way that they responded was with love and tolerance and compassion.
Got a couple more questions for you, Jeanell.
Yeah.
The first is I read in the opening that you and your husband keep the fire hot. After 17 years, how did the two of you do that?
We are just so committed to having fun and being playmates. We don't have kids. And so we really have to generate ourselves in the bedroom, outside of the bedroom, in conversation. And I think we're just both so present to each other and what each other brings to each other's lives. And we deeply appreciate the space that each other brings. And we work really, really hard to keep our space clean. And when I say space, I mean like the emotional space, the vulnerability, to keep it clean and to keep it safe. Because without trust, it's really hard to build a really strong foundation. And so I think, talking about the bedroom, for example, being able to look into each other's eyes, to be able to talk about what you want and need from each other, to laugh, to be playful, I think is so important. And I love that my husband is so comfortable with me that he just shows his vulnerability and it doesn't scare him. And that when he looks at me like I am the most beautiful thing. Like I don't question his love for me. I just look into his eyes and I can feel it. And that takes work. And so I tell people, our marriage is actually quite easy and it takes work. So, for example, in the wintertime, we're going, okay, it's starting to get boring. We're just sitting here watching Netflix. So I said to my husband, like, hey, why don't we go buy a new digital piano and we'll record, we'll duo together, we'll learn new songs. And he's like so excited about it. Right? He's like, yeah. Or I'll say, hey, honey, let's go salsa dancing or let's go paint night. He's up for anything pretty much. And so we really work hard be to participate in each other's interests, even though it might not be what we're interested in, but we love each other so much that we know how much it means to the other person. And so we show up. And so, the three buckets that I really encourage my clients to do is to share, to shift their energy, and show up. And show up is really about being the change you wish to see. If you want more love, show more love. If you want more affection, show more affection. If you want to be forgiven, then forgive. You got to, it starts with us. I think too many people are waiting for the other person to make the first move, but not communicating that expectation. So, guess what? We're now disappointed. And then what happens? We start making up stories that say, oh, my partner doesn't care. They don't love me. It's not true. It's just stuff that we make up. And so we need to be responsible for that and just say, hey, honey, you know what? I have a request. Would it be okay? And this is what my husband says to me, honey, I have a request. Would it be okay if sometimes you pursued me instead of I pursue you all the time? Didn't even occur to me. I was like, absolutely. But it took courage for him to say that to me. Like, I kind of feel like I'm always the one making the first move. And I'd really like it if he would sometimes make the first move. And it was such a beautiful request. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't this hurtful accusation. You never. And so I think that's the other thing about communication. We need to be careful of our words when we speak to our partner, especially in very intimate and sensitive topics. We have to remember that within each of us is a 5-year-old that just wants to be loved. right? And we can be really frustrated with our partner, and that's okay. But we have to take responsibility for our own behavior and the condition of our relationships.
I love all that. It's so good. It's so good. How can listeners learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, they can find me. They can learn about me on my website, and that is JeanellGreene.com. Or you can also go to saveourmarriage.ca. And I have some great resources there. I have a, 5 ways to improve your communication with your partner. It's kind of my top 5 secrets that I teach my clients that I give away for free. So if that's some communication is an area of your relationship that needs work, which is like 99.9% of clients, if not 100%, pick that up.
Yeah, and that's JeanellGreene.com. Jeanell. Green is Greene. Did I get that right, Jeanell?
That's right. Thank you.
Before we wrap, do you have any final words of encouragement?
Hmm. Be true to yourself. Love yourself, even, and consider that you are perfectly imperfect, and that's perfect. And that we are all here for a reason, and that everything we go through is for a reason. And when we can look at that with gratitude and grace, we can experience love and happiness and peace and all the things that we all want. And we don't need the outside world to validate that. We just need to create that within ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. Jeanell, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed.
Many blessings. You can contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.